When this game ended, all Peter Lecco could say was, wow, oh my god, I feel like it deserves a moment of silence. There was an incredible finish to this tight game between Gukesh and Nodebek Abdusattorov. So it was Uzbekistan versus India 2, and they were right at the top of the table, very tense fight. So let's see what happened. Gukesh kicks off with d4, and we go down this line of the Queen's Gambit declined again, the Ragozin variation. So after knight to c3, the bishop comes to b4, and now we had this Queen a4 check line. It drives the knight to c6, blocking this c-pawn. You have to defend that bishop, and now pawn e3, castles from black, bishop d2, all very solid. And in round 6, when Gukesh played this, we saw his opponent go d takes on c4. And then we had this line. I really like this direct way of playing from black actually. The bishop dropped back, queen c2 from Gukesh, and e5, immediately striking in the centre. And black wasn't doing too bad at all out of the opening, but then slowly got crushed on the king side. Great attack from Gukesh. But we didn't see that in this game. Nodebek goes pawn a5, a very different way to handle the position. So he gives up the bishop pair here after a3. We had recaptures, and then he drops this knight back to e7. So no quick e5 in this game. How's this bishop getting out? Well, after queen to c2, the job there is done. He now goes b6 to develop that bishop, and we had pawn b3 from Gukesh. Again, this is logical. He wants to activate this one. I mean, if e5 is not coming for some time, who knows when c5 is coming? Well, he wants to bring this bishop around here now, as we'll see. So the bishop came to a6, now pawn a4, preparing that maneuver. Knight to e4 attacked it, it dropped back to b2, and now the knight comes back to c6, looks strange blocking that c-pawn, but the idea is that after the bishop hits this dangerous diagonal, well, now the knight blocks on b4. And now Gukesh just chops that one off. The queen is well placed here. It's hard to live with that powerful knight. So although he gives up the bishops, he does change the pawn structure here, and we'll see how dangerous this a-pawn actually becomes later in the game. So now we had bishop to d3, pressuring this knight, and if you go f5, a kind of knee-jerk blitz reaction, it's playable, but you give up this big e5 square. There's no dark squared bishop. White can always kick you with f3 easier than you can kick white, so that's the problem. So instead the knight dropped back, stays solid. Now we had castles, and now pawn c5, and you kind of want to liberate that backwards pawn. I mean, if we drop back a move, this could really be a target down the c-file at the right moment if black's not careful. So that's why c5 here liberates the pawn, but now there's a new kind of problem that emerges in the position. So very simple stuff, takes on c5, the pawn recaptures, and now an excellent move from Gukesh. If you want to pause it, look for the best move in the position, please do so. It's just a positional move here, but you know, it's a good test of your understanding of these things. So the pawn drives on to e4. Now there's a tactical shot at play here. So if you try going d4 to close the centre, well, then we go e5, drive the knight away, take on h7. This is the tactical problem. So you're forced to actually resolve the tension in the centre. If you take here, well, that's a good pawn structure for white. We can gang up on this pawn. Instead, we had takes here, but the c5 pawn is still a problem now. It's on a dark square here, so it can't be defended by the dark squared bishop. And although it means this one's in a good piece with scope, white's the first one to the punch, and there's also problems down the d file, as we'll see. Sorry about the helicopter, let me just close this window. They're coming for me, they've heard how good my chess videos are, they want to put me in prison. Okay, bishop takes on e4. Now, the rook is attacked. You can take this one immediately, but black's a bit scared to kind of bring the queen in too soon. So the rook nudges up here. Now we had knight to e5, queen d6, attacks that knight, and Gukesh deals with this now in a tactical manner. So he goes rook f to e1, no taking the knight, or this simple discovery check picks up the queen. So instead the knight took on e4, now in this position, the queen dives in. And now look at this bishop on a6. It's a pretty miserable piece at the moment. You want to get it back into the game, but the problem is then you cut this rook connecting with the 7th rank. You hit the queen, yes, but it can come away to d3 here, and you're challenging this d-file in a really uncomfortable way. I mean, rook d8 is the knee-jerk response, but you can simply take, rook recaptures, challenge the file again, you're forcing off the rooks, again you've got control of the only open file on the board, and this knight is just a superior minor piece in this position, can gang up on these pawns, plus you've got the passed a pawn. So these are the kind of positional problems going on here for Nodebek. So he goes rook to d8 immediately. Now we had queen f3, prepares to go rook to d1, gives support to that square. So the queen drops back to c7, anticipating that. Now the rook challenged the file. This rook drops back to protect the other one, and now rook takes was played. The rook recaptured, rook to d1. Once again, very simple stuff, and you can't win a minor piece, or then you've got these tactical problems on the back rank. That's actually mate. So after this move here, so rook to d1, now we had rook c8, so you don't want to cede the file, but this is the problem with actually giving up on the file here. So instead the rook moves away there, and now queen g3 protects this knight. It truly is en prise now. Pawn h5 now played, and this does allow this rook move of rook to d7, and you might be thinking, well, this is surely just game over, but here's the sneaky reply, rook to d8. Because now if you pick up the queen, well, you've got back rank problems of your own. So this one would force the rooks off the board. This is still actually very playable. The queen could come here, you can't exchange, or the knight hops back, takes this pawn. So the queen would have to do something like that, attack the knight. Then you can go queen e3, hold the knight, pick up the pawn. We see very similar things in the game, basically. This was just a different way to go. But instead, Gukesh starts with h3, rook d8 now. The rook took off here, queen recaptures, now knight d3, pawn h4 played, queen e3, bishop b7, and here the pawn actually falls in just a moment. So first f3 to blunt the bishop, now queen d6, king f1, pawn e5 played, and now finally here Gukesh chops on c5, picks up that pawn. So he's just doing really well now in this position. The only thing he's got to watch out for is these perpetual check ideas which black's got on the board. So the bishop is attacked, comes back to c8, king e1 now played. Now we had bishop f5, pawn a5, and I like how here Gukesh uses that pawn as a distraction. So he goes now after queen c7, pawn to a6. This forces the bishop to drop back to cover that pawn, but now knight d3. He just gives up on it because he realized he can win the e5 pawn here instead. This is what gets played, and you can't be chopping off these queens. Then the knight recaptures. The endgame's just hopeless. This pawn's going to drop, plus the king's much closer to the action, completely lost. So queen b6 played. I'm highlighting the g1 square. You know, Nodebek's looking for checks here. He wants to invade. So that's why we had knight c5. Cuts out that queen. It now came to a5 here. The king came to d1. Now we had queen d8 check. If you try and invade like this, by the way, well, you can't really get too far. I mean, you could check from here, then you're picking up this pawn. And even if the queen comes here or starts trying to check the king, you know, your bishop is loose. This is no good. So the queen can't go too far. It checks from d8, also covers the back rank. King c2 now played. Bishop c8 drops back. And now here I was surprised by Gukesh's next move. So it looks so logical to go knight d3, prepare to pick up this pawn, and I'm not entirely clear why he didn't do this. I mean, bishop e6 is the top engine response, then you can simply pick up the pawn, and okay, we go from here. The king can tuck on c3, you know, it just looks great to my eyes. Or there's also g6, you know, maybe he was worried about this and then pressure on the knight. But again, you can still take, if check, king c3. So I'm not clear why he didn't go for this one. But instead of going knight to d3 here, he went knight to e4, doesn't pick up this pawn for the moment, and now bishop e6 was followed by king b2, another imprecise move, although the time is running down, and now there's real counterplay. So queen to a8, threatening to check here, supported by the pawn. Now knight c5 came back, covers this b pawn, the queen checked, and now king b1, a bit imprecise, you should come to c2 first, but king b1 played, but now it walks straight into this g6 move, followed by bishop f5 check. So king c2 was now played, anticipating that one. We had a check on a2. The queen jumped back and blocked here. Bishop f5 check. And now you can go king c1. Instead, knight e4 was selected. Gets out of the way of this pawn. And now queen a7 switches back, prepares to invade here or here, this kind of thing. And now we see some shuffling around of the king here. So the players kind of repeat moves a little bit in this position. You know, Gukesh is covering his weak points here. Nodebek's kind of probing around. By the way, this is pinned, this knight, so you can't pick up the queen. Now queen d2, queen g1, king c2, queen a1. You know, you get this kind of shuffly stuff. And essentially, Gukesh can just repeat the position here. Now, Prague had an endgame of rook against bishop. There were some pawns on the board, but it was technically winning. And really, Gukesh should have just been repeating the position here, leaving Prague to win that game, all being well, and that would have clinched the match for India 2 versus Uzbekistan. But he didn't take the draw here. He wanted to play on for the win. So would he win this game or go on to draw or lose? Well, we'll soon see. So after king d3, queen g1, now queen e2 played, the queen switched back, and here Gukesh starts going for it. So queen e3, now queen a2, and he doesn't protect the pawn this time. This one's also attacked. King d4, this is his idea. Queen takes on g2. You run this with the engines, it's still drawing, but now anything can happen because both players start mopping up pawns. So knight g5 played, supported by the queen here. Pawn f6 kicked it, but now queen e8 check, king g7, check from here, king h6. Looks so scary for the black king after this check, but it just finds a home on h5 here. And if you try and go hunting it too aggressively with this kind of thing, well, then black gets their day checking from here. You force the king up, you start mopping up here, then you pick up another pawn, give the king an escape route. This is better for black. So instead of actually trying to hunt that king, we had king to c5. Now queen took here. Now queen takes on f6. Queen e3 check. The king took here. So white's got the connected passes, but now so has black after bishop takes on h3. Knight e5 played. Hits that g6 pawn. Queen d2 check. Drives the king up the board. The bishop now checked here, and again Gukesh had this opportunity to simplify if he wanted it. He could have taken this bishop, something like this. Technically should be a draw, but again there's opportunities for both sides. But he didn't chop off the bishop. King c5 played, and now we had queen check again, king b4, bishop f5, and it just covers this weak point in time. So queen h8 check played. And now for the first time in the game, we see Nodebek blocking with the queen, so he offers a queen exchange for the very first time, and this time Gukesh can't take it. If he chops them off, the h-pawn's just running way too fast in this position here, then the g-pawn could support if the knight tried to stop it, and the bishop covers the queening square. So coming back here, you can't swap the queens, so queen d8 was played. Now we had queen g7. Hits this knight, and this is where Gukesh was getting really low on time, thinking about how to keep the position going, and he makes a terrible blunder. He plays knight f3, just allowing a sheer tactic in one, queen b7 check, and here he just sits there, head in his hands, looks to the side like this, just shaking his head. He cannot believe it. And this is where Peter, both Peters, Leko and Svidler, they're in the studio just feeling so sorry for Gukesh to lose the game in this manner. So he goes down, his flag actually just goes, his time runs out. Abdusattorov takes a very unlikely victory, and Gukesh's crazy unbeaten run this tournament just comes to an end. So commiserations to him. Great win for Abdusattorov and Uzbekistan, and they're now joint level top with Armenia, with India 2 chasing, I think USA as well, a couple in the chasing pack or so. So really tense finish, kind of hotting up now in the Olympiad. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you want to see another incredible Gukesh game, click here. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.